Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. We also have just launched our brand new LinkedIn page. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn @Campaign for GLR. Please use the hashtag #LearningTuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we will be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Hattie Miles Polka, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen mode only, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, as well as all resources shared during the presentation and in the chat, will be shared in a follow-up email to all who registered. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing, and we highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week, we have, on Tuesday, June 7th, we have the high-dosage tutoring state strategies for advancing equitable learning recovery. The following week, on June 14th, we have a double header with inspiring learning in everyday places, as well as stabilizing the early care and education workforce, increasing compensation ASAP. And then 3 weeks from now, on the 21st, we will be talking about convening for greater impact, more than money philanthropy. We'll be posting a registration link in the chat, so feel free to register for that. And we hope that you can join us. Joining you now is Emily, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Hattie, and hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday webinar, Prioritizing Early Relational Health in Tutoring for Equitable Learning Recovery. Today's exchange of ideas picks up on and merges multiple previous GLR Learning Tuesday sessions where we have focused intently on tutoring as a strategy for equitable learning loss recovery, as well as the centrality of relationships in ensuring that young learners can get back on track for early school success. Right now, states and districts are investing millions of recovery funds to expand tutoring programs, especially for K through third grade students from low-income families who have been hardest hit by disrupted instructional time because of the pandemic. Michigan and Texas are just two states that have been in the news recently, featuring their massive investments in tutoring. And our session next week will further explore these state strategies. And an important but less emphasized component of these tutoring programs is the relational support that occurs in the tutor-tutee relationship, the time and attention that goes beyond academics and zeroes in on ensuring students feel seen, heard, understood, and supported. It is this relational aspect that can truly unlock and enable academic learning, and it's important to explore why and how the connection between tutor and tutee can make such an impact. And so today we are thrilled to have the opportunity to learn with and from early childhood expert Leili of the Harvard Graduate School of Education to explore the impact that can be made by who he calls the helpers, or those who serve children and families on the front lines of education. And of course, this includes tutors working with students in or out of the classroom, online or in person. Our GLR Executive Fellow, John Gompertz, will engage in conversation with Dr. Lee about the key aspects of child-adult interactions that lead to positive youth development and increased interest in and focus on academic learning. John will then moderate a panel discussion among leaders from national and local tutoring programs who will discuss how tutors can be trained and supported to facilitate positive relationships while pursuing reading achievement, and what this looks like on a day-to-day basis, especially when there's so much pressure to advance students academically as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. And to begin our conversation, I'm honored to welcome and introduce our esteemed moderator, our featured speaker, and our great panel with us today. My intros will be brief, and all are encouraged to access the full bios that we've linked in the chat. So first we have our moderator, John Gompertz, who many of you know now, have met before, of course. He's our GLR's executive fellow. He is a longtime leader in nonprofit and government organizations devoted to civic engagement and to creating greater opportunity for children and youth. And before joining us, John served as president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance and as the director of AmeriCorps in the Obama administration. Our great presenter today is Dr. Junlei Lee. He serves as the Saul Zant Senior Lecturer in Early Childhood Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. His research and practice focuses on understanding and supporting the work of helpers, those who serve children and families on the front lines of education and social services. He developed what's called the simple interactions approach to help identify what ordinary people do extraordinarily well with children in everyday moments. And then we have our great panel, our discussants. Diana Klaus is a literacy coach who serves on the board of Raising Readers in Story County in Ames, Iowa, a partner of the Story County Reads program, the Story County Reads Campaign for Good Little Reading Consortium. As a retired elementary teacher, lecturer in the Iowa State University College of Education, and coordinator of the Reading Clinic, Diana has worked with students ranging in ages from preschool through college. Jennifer Joyce is a fierce advocate for literacy support for students and families and passionately committed to helping all children become successful readers. As the managing director of national programs with Reading Partners, Jen has written curriculum, led pilots and professional development to scale the Reading Partners program and ensured the program could continue to adapt and grow for students during the pandemic. Paola Milbank is a high school senior at School Without Walls in Washington, D.C. Back in her sophomore year, she and her classmates began the DC Virtual Storytime program, in which DC high school students serve as tutors for DCPS elementary school students and read together 2 to 4 times a week over Zoom. And this fall, Paola is starting her college career at Yale University. We also have Dr. Kara Schrack. She just recently joined AARP Foundation Experience Corps, well, I guess not so recently, January 2021, as Director of Education and Evaluation, where she focuses on raising student achievement. Prior to this work, she spent 16 years with Save the Children's US programs as Director of School Age Programs. She has also served as a reading staff developer and coach. And finally, Ann Sinclair is Chief Learning Officer at AMPACT, a nationally focused nonprofit that administers the AmeriCorps programs Reading Corps, Math Corps, and Early Learning Corps. Ann oversees the development of effective training and coaching models for AmeriCorps members and their coaches. And again, I encourage you all to check the bios linked in the chat for more details about our great speakers. And now I'm very excited to turn over to John Gompertz to get our conversation going with Dr. Junlei Lee.
Thanks so much, Emily. And thanks as always for all your work in putting this together. I don't know if people recognize how much it is to put these things together, but you've done a great job as always, and much appreciation. Junlei, so nice to see you. I'm so excited that we have a chance to talk. And I'm really thrilled also to introduce you to our network. I think you're going to become a quick fan favorite of all our friends out in the network. I know we're going to watch a video in a minute, and we'll have some fun with that. But before we get into that, I'm just curious. Tell us a little about yourself. Like, how'd you get in this game? How did you end up researching what's going on with the relationships and early learning?
Sure, John. So glad to join you and our wonderful panel today. I think I started off as a researcher in elementary and middle schools, and I was also trying to, I think, teach a little bit. And it turns out that I think I was not a very good teacher. And I tried to learn from the teachers around me. And I try to emulate them. I try to imitate what they say and how they do it. And I can never quite get it right. And I think it was in that context that I recognized there's a kind of relationship that teachers built that goes just beyond, just the words they say or even how they manage their classrooms and lessons. And so I became just absolutely fascinated with the kind of empowering relationships that adults build with children. And of course, over time, we see that these relationships happen not just with teachers, but with tutors, with mentors, with social workers, with community volunteers. And of course, these relationships don't just exist between adults and children, they can happen between adults and adults too. So anyhow, a long story short, this was how I think we became just fascinated in what Fred Rogers, or Mr. Rogers, used to call helpers. Anyone who supports children and families right there on the front line.
Love that. Love that. And tell us a little about your current work. What are you obsessing about now and excited about right now?
I think for perhaps the last 10 years in our work trying to support the helpers, wherever they might be, right? We recognize that collectively as educational systems or community service systems, we are not doing a great job helping the helpers. We put a lot of emphasis on, what is it that we need to do for children, which of course, but then I think my two colleagues at the school here would often say we need to be as invested in the helpers as the helpers are in the children. And that whether it is by common sense or whether it is by research, it's clear that we cannot make a lasting impact on children by skipping over the adults in the middle. So I think for the last 10 years, my colleague and I have been just focused on understanding what helpers actually do day in and day out, and then thinking about how do we support them from the orientation to the training, but all the way to big issues like compensation and supporting their professional development.
Wow, that's so fantastic. I cannot believe we have not intersected before this, but I'm thrilled that we have now, and we're going to take full advantage of it. Thank you for all that background. Now, you've suggested that we start this session by showing a little video, which I have seen before, and I think it's a great idea. So we're gonna flip this around, and basically I'm going to give you the mic, and I'm going to let you introduce this video and show this video, and then I think you're going to hold the mic for a second. You're going to quiz me before we flip this back around.
Sure, John. I just figured you, as well as our panelists, have had a lot of experience thinking about what does it mean to support children. And video is the primary way we do our work. We wanted to capture what that looks like right there on the front line. And to us, every video that captures a real unscripted scene in the world feels like a gift to us, right? So it's something from which we can learn, and then we can wonder about, what does this mean for learning? So this very short video I wanted to share with you, John, is it comes from just a very brief project we did right before the pandemic in a local school right out here in the Boston area. It's in a neighborhood called Somerville. It's in the public school. And it's a very economically, ethnically, racially diverse district, and a lot of immigrant families. So we were working in the preschool, the pre-K and Head Start classrooms. And this one particular classroom from which the video came, have about 20 children. And when you walk into the front door, there's a little a roster of the children on the wall, and on the roster next to each child's name is the language they speak at home. So in this classroom of less than 20 students, there were 10 different home languages, which was just beautiful. Wow. But you can also imagine kind of what a gift it is, right? It's challenging, and it's also, just the rich gift that children bring. So what I wanted to show was just a moment where a teacher is sitting down with a child and they're talking about something. So and I, John, I don't have anything specific I'm looking for. I was just looking for your reactions when you see something like this.
I went home. I went home. All right, where's your home?
Right over here.
Right here? Home. Okay, before I let you go, so this is you in the mirror. Do you see that? Okay, so you said this is you, that you drew you. I'm looking at your head. Right on the top of your head, you have this. What's this?
That's so small.
What is that? Is that hair? I see hair on you. But the question is, what color is your hair?
Black.
Okay. Okay. Let's see if the black matches. Can you put that to your head? Is that the color of your hair? All right, so let's make some hair on your head. All right. And then I'm looking at your head. You got your hair. This is your face.
It's brown.
What are these?
These are my eyes.
Okay, so how many eyes do you have?
2.
Okay, so I see you have one circle here, but you just said you have 2 eyes.
On it.
Okay. What color are your eyes?
White.
And
Black.
we've got a black. How would you color that in your eyes?
Because I wanted to actually.
So can you color in your eyes?
Yeah, black.
So, John, and I certainly would, I'd love to invite anyone who's participating on this call, just, if you notice something, put it in the chat. But John, I just want to start with you, kind of when you watch that, what jumps out to you, from any kind of perspective experience that you have?
Well, I would say I saw encouragement and affirmation, and I saw clever smuggling in of progress and learning.
That's right. That's right. And I think what struck me so much about this video is, and moments like this, is how all these different parts kind of gets braided together, right? There's, affirming who that child is by affirming what that child looks like, but then the careful scaffold or support, right, to help the child see himself clearer and clearer. And all the while, there's this kind of, it's this encouragement that is both kind of warm and firm. Right? You see, a teacher was very serious, like, we're doing something, but the child is delighted, I think, in that whole process. Although that particular moment isn't reading, I think anyone, who's working on reading and language development can see, right, how all these kind of little basic skills can build up to something, that contribute to reading, to language development, literacy. But even, I think, beyond that, it's just that a moment of interaction like that braids together all these different threads that makes human interaction just so powerful, not just for a preschool student, but perhaps at any age.
Tell us a little bit more about what's going on in that video. Is the man a teacher, or is he a helper, an informal or formal helper?
Yeah, in this case, this is a preschool teacher, a young teacher who's just a few years into his teaching career, and this is just how he interacts with the children. And for us, I think when we do this work, we don't want to prescribe to the teachers, like, this is what you should do with a child. What we try to do is to capture the way the practice looks like And then we actually sat down with a lot of the teachers in that school from preschool all the way to 3rd grade, and asked the teachers to describe, much in the same way, John, that you just did, kind of what they see in that moment. So they have a chance to describe their own work as well as to offer these descriptions to their colleagues.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in a minute because it connects to something else that we've talked about. But you talked about this braid, right? I don't have enough fingers, so I can't do it right. But talk about talk about the braiding, talk about what the strands are and how that all comes together.
Sure. So over time in our work, both in the United States as well as in other countries, with children as young as babies, as old as adolescents, what we have observed is that teachers, caregivers who work with them closely seem to blend together several aspects of interaction. So in our work, we describe them as 4 of them. I see Emily just put our simpleinteractions.org kind of website in the chat. Anyone can kind of take a look at it, but the 4 dimensions are, right, 1 is what we call connection, this idea that 2 people seem to be emotionally in tune with each other or seem to be well matched, and that's something you saw in that moment, right? They both kind of have the appropriate level of kind of emotional engagement in that. And then the second dimension is what we call reciprocity, or sometimes, in early childhood, people call it serve and return. But all that means is that there's giving and receiving on both sides. That whatever the activity is, whether it's reading or playing or even, in infancy and diaper change, there's just a lot of giving, like you give me something, I receive you, I hear you, I see you, but then I offer something back. You mentioned, John, about the support and encouragement that the teacher offers, and the child receives that, right? So this kind of idea of reciprocity. The third dimension is what, John, you described as kind of subtly, right, nudging the child forward, or in our terms, we call it opportunity to grow. So that learning and relating are not 2 separate things, right? It's right in the middle of that relationship that we get a chance to grow. So you can see kind of how that child learns to notice himself clearly and describe it and draw it, and all of that happen right in the middle of all these interactions, as opposed to apart from the interactions. And the last one is what we call inclusion, or a sense of belonging, so that in any interaction, it's the child who has been made to feel like they belong here, they have a place here, and they can bring who they are right into that environment. And even though we see a one-on-one connection, I think we get that sense of the child kind of feeling comfortable being there and belonging there. So connection, reciprocity, inclusion, and opportunity to grow. Those are the 4 threads that we would say that tend to kind of braid together when these interactions with children seem to work.
So I love that. Just bring it home for us. How and why does that support learning? What goes on there that supports, what we think of as academic, developing knowledge and skills?
Well, John, we can talk about this in reading specifically, right? So I'm not a reading specialist, so I check with some of my colleagues who are. And first of all, in both language development and in reading, we typically deal with 2 kinds of things, right? One is the quantity of the experiences, right? Like, how many books you read, or when you're a child, like how many words you hear. That's the quantity of experience. The other is the quality of the experience, right? Which is often defined by the quality of engagement, whether it's engagement with books or engagement with a person. And while quantity and quality both are important, at least in language development over time, it's quite clear, right, that the quality of these experiences have a disproportionate impact. That we want high quality experiences rather than just mere adding together the quantity of it. On the other side, reading experts would talk about reading as involving 3 processes that happens almost simultaneously. One is the technical or mechanical process, right? The phonics, the decoding of the letters and so on. All these are very technical processes that children ought to be supported to learn. But that's not what reading is all about, right? That's just one of the processes. The other process is the personal and interpersonal, right? In reading, whether in listening to a story or whether in participating in a story, it's very much a thing that goes back and forth between two people, whether that person is a teacher, a parent, or tutor, and so on. And lastly, reading exists as social cultural processes, right? It's the kind of things that Rudine Sims Bishop, who's kind of the mother of children's literature, would talk about the windows, mirrors, sliding doors, right? Readings help us to see ourselves, or in that particular video we saw quite literally we have a mirror, but it's a window that opens up new world for us so that we can look through our own boxes and see a world before us. And the sliding door idea, that we can open it up, we can enter into worlds that we do not even get a chance to visit. And these things are social and cultural. It help us to understand who we are, who our families are, who our communities are, but then also expand to see who other people are and who their communities are. So these technical, relational, and social processes kind of work together to make that learning and development happen. And you can imagine kind of instrumental in that process are these human interactions that weaves together the learning of the text, the stories, with the giving and receive of ideas between the adult and the child, and then creating that sense of belonging, affirmation, encouragement that the children sees.
So I think that was fantastic. I think it's important to recognize when we're talking about tutoring programs as we are today, we're talking about kids who are struggling to learn in early school settings. We can focus on reading for a moment, but it's also true with math or anything else, that for a certain percentage of students, the sort of classroom, the sort of normal classroom thing works fine. And that's great. That's why we have that normal classroom thing. But for a lot of kids, and a lot of kids who have complicated lives, who may not feel as supported and all those things as others, the basic classroom thing doesn't fully work. And that's why, and then they struggle in school, and that's why we bring in tutoring. And it's interesting. I think sometimes people think, well, these kids are struggling, and what we really need to do is just upload more information into them, more skills into them. And so more time on task, called a tutor, is going to do that. But I think that what you're saying is, look, if a kid is struggling, you probably need some other dimensions to, as Emily said, unlock that young person's native ability to learn and develop.
That's right. I think, when we imagine a child struggling, let's say in reading, the child is not just struggling in reading. The child who struggles in reading, particularly in the school environment, is struggling with, do I fit here? Am I a reader? Do I belong in this classroom when I see other children who seem to be reading with ease? Where am I in all of this, right? So you can imagine the work of helping that child to read goes so much more than reading, right? It starts with the skills of reading, but it also includes the encouragement, the affirmation of that child that not only do you belong, but you are a reader, that you can read. And that a child who struggles in reading and mathematics, in anything, I think often feel like no matter how hard they try, they're not getting it, right? So they kind of feel like their effort and their progress is just detached, right? Like no matter how hard I try, I can't do it. And who builds that bridge for them? Who helps a child to see that your effort matters incrementally, piece by piece? It has to be a human being, right? Like a book couldn't do it all by itself. So a person that is trusted by the child is the person to provide both the support for the development of these highly technical skills, but at the same time to help the child feel like, hey, your effort matters and that you matter and that you belong here.
Wow. Give us a minute, Junlei, on symbol interactions, please, and then we'll keep moving forward.
Sure. I think the way we think about simple interactions is that we want to capture and provide a tool, a language for which we can talk about these interactions. We can see how these different threads of interactions kind of work with each other, whether we're teaching reading or math or anything at all. And I think what's underneath simple interaction is this idea that we can learn from what people are already doing. Right. So in terms of reading, for example, if we just carefully observe and reflect on what teachers do, what tutors do, we can learn a lot about the best practices that we have developed in supporting young children's reading development. I like to call this kind of practice-based practice. No matter what we teach, we all share a common practice. It's a relational practice. It's how to integrate the thing we teach with the relationship that we built. And I think simple interaction was just trying to provide a free, accessible tool and resource for people to understand the relational practice they have day in and day out.
Well, I love that. And someday we'll have a longer conversation about this, but I think that we know that a lot of kids from low-income communities and kids who feel marginalized for one reason or another experience what people like to call microaggressions, rightly so, over and over and over each day. And actually, I think you're suggesting partly a set of micro affirmations. I mean, I think that's what we saw in that little video. That, you know, all the "I see you, you're good, let's go, we can make some progress here," which is really at odds with the message I fear that so many of those young people have mostly gotten. So let me ask you one last thing, and then I want to turn to our panel and invite you to join with them. Okay, we get it. That's all good. We agree with you. Our heads are bobbing up and down. We got lots of people whose heads are bobbing up and down, I'm sure. How do we do this? I want to bridge from the why and the what to the how do you help people develop this kind of practice? And then we're going to turn to our programs and hear how they do this.
I think we have, yeah, as you said, we have a great panel who can talk about this. I think at my level of understanding, I think what is so important in reading, particularly, let's say, if you're a tutor, right, coming into to get to know a child first, I think what is so important is that the tutor is bringing all of themselves into that interaction. They may have had some training in reading and some may even be experts, but the tutor brings so much more than just their skills on reading. They bring themselves, who they are and how they listen and how they observe and how they tune into a child's emotions. And then at the same time, if that tutor invites the whole child into the reading, right? Not just the child's skills or the lack of, but who that child is and what is that child interested in and what is that child frustrated with, right? Invite the whole child in. I think if the full human being of the tutor and the full human being of the child gets to meet together in these interactions in and around reading, I think we have something beautiful that not only develops reading, but that can become powerful, positive childhood experiences, the kind of experiences that serve as important protective buffers against both kind of the kind of microaggressions you're talking about, but aggressions that children experience all around.
And adversities, adversities that we know kids experience, and we know that relationships are one of the most important buffers to those adverse experiences.
That's right. That's right. And in early relational health about positive childhood experiences, one of the questions they ask people is, you know, as you were growing up, do you have at least 2 non-parental adults who took a genuine interest in you? And I can imagine that anyone who reads with a child has the possibility of becoming one of those, at least 2 non-parental adults. And that's the power.
I love that. I love that. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. And as I said, I hope you'll hang around with us and hear our panelists, friends, and then feel free to join the conversation. And with that, I want to turn and invite our panelists to all turn on their cameras and join the conversation. And I want to make a couple of comments here as we transition from, there you come, Diana. Thank you. We'll make a couple of comments here as we transition from the conversation with Junlei, which was to me fabulous, and I could just keep going, and to the conversation with the panelists. So two things I'd like to mention. One is one can really hardly talk about early school success without acknowledging what happened just last week in Uvalde, Texas, and what a complete horror it is. We could have many whole sessions on this and share our thinking and our feelings. We did within the GLR team last week. It was very, very powerful. But I think the level of some combination of sadness and fury about what happens and what it means for families and for children across the country is just overwhelming. So know that we're thinking about all that as you are too. Second, you can now see on the screen our panel. And I think for those of you who often participate in GLR learning opportunities, you know that we work very, very hard to have a broadly representative group of people who are speaking in every session. And I just want to acknowledge, in this session, we did not succeed. You can see it on your screen, and there's nothing that we can do about it today. But we acknowledge this, and I think you all know that this is something of tremendous significance to the campaign, and we will continue to endeavor to have broadly representative groups of speakers in all of our events going forward. So with that, I am delighted to introduce our panel, which is spectacular and will speak to, if Junlei just spoke to the why relationships are so important and what goes on in those relationships. For practitioners, okay, as I said, get it. How do we do this? How do we prepare the people who we are deploying to work directly with kids, remember, with kids who are struggling, almost by definition, but with kids who are struggling? How do we prepare those people for the assignment so that they can do not just technical work, but really connect with kids and do all the things that Junlei just talked about? We have a fantastic group of folks from local programs and national programs. And I'd like to just start with really brief descriptions of the programs, like 1 minute each. So I'm going to do a big race around here and ask you to quickly describe your program, and then we'll get into the conversation. Jennifer, let's begin with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Joyce. I'm with Reading Partners. We're an AmeriCorps program that provides one-on-one literacy intervention for students in kindergarten and through 4th grade to help them meet their literacy growth goals. And with Reading Partners, I've been with Reading Partners for a little over 10 years at this point. And before that, I was a kindergarten teacher and a literacy specialist.
Fantastic. Diana?
Yes, I'm Diana Claus, and I'm a literacy consultant with Raising Readers in Story County, which is a grassroots nonprofit based in Ames, Iowa. And Raising Readers has created 2 programs that are germane to our pre-K to 3rd grade discussion today. We have a program called Story Pals, which trains tutors to be role models and bond with 3 to 5-year-olds who are recommended for a boost in language skills. And we use a strategy of dialogic reading. And there's a lot of research that goes with that to show that that also has a positive effect for behavior. And then Reading Buddies trains tutors to support kindergarten through third graders with literacy skill development in after school and summer settings. And I've actually assumed all of the roles. I've been a tutor many times, the site supervisor, and the program designer and manager. So I think it's important that you experience all the roles to really know the programs.
Awesome. Thanks. Kara from Experience Corps.
Hi,
Also-
everybody. Yep. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. My name is Kara Schrack, and I'm the Director of Education and Evaluation for Experience Corps. We are an intergenerational program that's focused on academic mentoring. We are focused in about 23 locations now across the country, working in either a school or after-school program, so about 250 specific locations. Very focused in K through 3, and through the mentoring process, trying to work with children who are struggling readers, doing some very specific activities, which help really develop academic success, which we know is connected to building children's just success and mental health overall. So
Great.
hopefully that was short enough so you can pass it to someone else.
That's fantastic. Paula, we'll span the entire age spectrum here and go to your program. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Paula Milbank, and for the last year, I've run the DC Virtual Storytime program, which was created in June 2020 as a response to the pandemic shutting down schools. And what we do is we pair elementary schoolers from Title I schools across DC and Maryland with high school tutors over Zoom a few times a week. And we've run sessions ever since June 2020. And even as we've come back in person, we've still maintained a lot of interest in our program. Parents sign students up and we reach out to schools, and people from schools can also sign up students that they would recommend for the program.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. Anne, you want to round it out? You actually have the entire age spectrum in your program.
True. I'm Anne Sinclair. I'm Chief Learning Officer at AMPACT, which is the nonprofit that administers the AmeriCorps programs, Reading Corps, Math Corps, and Early Learning Corps. The programs that are most relevant to this discussion today are Early Learning Corps and Reading Corps. Our Early Learning Corps embeds an AmeriCorps member of any age in an early learning classroom where they support Tier 1 instruction as well as small group instruction and one-on-one instruction for kids who demonstrate need in the areas of early literacy, early math, and social emotional skills. And then our K-3 reading program, Reading Corps, supports students one-on-one or one-on-two with foundational literacy skills.
All right, that's fantastic. As folks can tell, we have some experts with us today, and appreciate all of you joining. As I said in the close of the conversation with Junlei, I really want to focus on the how. So how do you prepare? Let's all stipulate that what Junlei has said is obviously right. And relationships, this is not just like, plug in a thumb drive to a kid and they all of a sudden know a whole bunch of reading skills. If only it were that easy, but it's not. So Anne, you just finished. Your voice is still warm. Tell us, and you have a whole bunch of programs. So I'm really curious how you all prepare people for the human side, the non-technical side of the interaction with struggling students.
Sure. We really saw a silver lining of the pandemic in that we changed our training model. Instead of trying to fit every important detail into 3 days of instruction in a convention center, we were able to really expand our offerings related to relationship building. So now tutors take about a dozen online asynchronous courses that are related to the value of building equity skills, identifying and counteracting implicit bias, building positive relationships with students, using an asset-based perspective, and practicing self-reflection in their tutoring sessions. So we really believe that that's the way to start with a robust initial training, but then they also receive coaching on how to embed those skills in their tutoring. So our fidelity checklists don't just look at adherence to our Reading Corps model, they also look at the quality of the interaction that the tutor is having with the student. so that we can better direct our coaching supports to those tutors. So it's both initial training and ongoing support and coaching of those tutors.
Wow, fantastic. I feel like we just were going out to test a bunch of cars and we just drove a Rolls Royce first. So I don't know how everything else is gonna feel. Paula, tell us, you're dealing with your colleagues, your peers, who are high school students. So this is some pretty heavy responsibility for high school students. How do you prepare a high school student who's, let's say, full of energy and idealism and wants to do stuff, but may not actually be very dialed into the realities of a struggling student? How do you prepare them for that relationship?
Most of what we do is from a brief orientation that we have before every season of sessions. And we ask our tutors to be the adults in the situation and make sure that they're acting with maturity. And just to double check on that, me and the other leaders of the program circulate around rooms, and sometimes students don't show up, so those tutors also circle around rooms. But we have like a pretty set requirement of what needs to happen during sessions. And because we can go and check around, we make sure that happens. We also ask our tutors to check in with students at the beginning of each session. And when they pick a book together, is how our session is structured. When they pick books together, they get to know each other more, and we have brain breaks throughout the sessions too. So there's more activities for the tutor and student to form a relationship. We also end every session with a feedback form that we send out to the tutors to make sure everything was running smoothly throughout the session and that they didn't have any issues or complaints in the session or anything that they thought we needed to be aware of. And after every season of sessions, we sent a similar form out to parents just to make sure that they didn't have any problems. And we made sure it was clear that our inbox was always open to address any issues. And people definitely took advantage of that when necessary.
Excellent, thanks. Kara, well, we continue to jump around the age spectrum. How do you prepare, and just in full disclosure, before Kara was there, I actually ran Experience Corps for a few years. So I'm very, very familiar with the model. And it is actually probably the time when I learned the absolute centrality of relationships and unlocking struggling students' ability to learn. I mean, I used to go around and give speeches telling these stories, but I'd love, Kara, for you to tell everybody what your current training is like, and perhaps allude to some of the particular skills that older adults may have in dealing with struggling students.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming to me because I was going to raise my hand otherwise. So we're on the same wavelength there. So we actually really invest a lot of time and talent in our training process for our volunteers. It starts with, especially with COVID, we really had to pivot quickly to a virtual format. And so we really utilized that time to explore also incorporating more virtual training opportunities. So we have pathways, what we call learning pathways, developed for our volunteers with a little bit of mix of self-paced learning. And then we follow up with our headquarters trainers, really working closely with our volunteers and our staff. Not only do we train in the actual structured session that we have, but we really focus a lot of work on strategies and practices around the mentoring aspect and relationship building, and how key that is for our volunteers who are 50 plus to bring their life experiences and their patience and working with these children who often really need just guidance and time to develop really important factors for their social emotional health, like like self-efficacy, like regulating their emotions and things like that. And knowing that they've got a caring adult that's going to touch base with them at least twice a week, sometimes more than that. We have some programs doing 3 or 4 times a week. The other thing is being part of the AARP enterprise. We are very focused on our mentors and our volunteers, and that's really important to us as an organization. And so offering so many resources for our volunteers. We have something called the Volunteer Engagement Series. And these past 1.5 to 2 years, we brought in a wonderful speaker who was focused on really lifting up the knowledge of our volunteers around how to help students manage their mental health during this time, and giving them strategies for working with children with ADHD or children who are perhaps struggle in self-regulating. So really building their bank of resources and knowledge. We must have offered at least 6 to 8 sessions just talking about what's going on with children's mental health and building our staff's capacity around that. So that was something really exciting we were able to do, something we're going to continue doing for our staff. Last thing I want to mention too is, you know, in the world of, you know, our volunteers, some of them have not been extremely comfortable with technology. And I think COVID has really forced us all into this technology space. So we've really tried a lot to also support our volunteers from the ground up with their comfort level in with technology, starting from how to use a Chromebook all the way up to using our systems and being able to do virtual tutoring. We've gotten them so comfortable with not only the technology and some of our skills, we've actually had some tutors come to us and say that they've put in to become substitute teachers because we've been able to elevate their skill set, and they really enjoy working with the students and they see the difference that they're making. So that's really an exciting piece, I think, from the volunteer side that we heavily focus on, that it's, you know, we see the importance of just training in the actual program, but beyond that, we know how important those practices are around mentoring. And then of course, investing in our volunteers because they are at the crux of what we're able to do for students.
Wow, that was fantastic. It got right to something that Junlei said about the practice being practice, and I want to, and also how we treat those who we deploy, how we support those who we deploy for this very important assignment. I'm going to come back to those issues in a second, but Jen, I wanted to turn to you and hear a little about. We know how strong Reading Partners is on the literacy side of all this, but I'm really curious about the way that you prepare people for the relational part of this work with kids who are, again, by definition, struggling somewhat.
Yeah, so I think it starts with our tutor orientation. A portion of our tutor orientation is dedicated to building relationships with your students. So from day one, we're talking about, we know that our goal is to have literacy improvement for our students. This happens through the relationships that they build with you. The first thing we hear from teachers and principals is that our students are going back into the classroom and raising their hand and participating and asking questions when they get back to the classroom before we've even given a second assessment or seen how far they've grown. And from teachers and principals, we know that when a student is listening, when they're asking questions, when they're raising hands in science, in history, in math, in their ELA courses, that's a big deal for students who are often having trouble reading or reading below grade level. So we want to make sure our tutors know from day one that confidence comes from you sitting with them saying, great job, today was hard and you didn't give up, and you go back into class and you try that again. And it's okay because we make mistakes as human beings, and that's what we do. So we make sure our tutors know that from day one, that they play this important role for our students. And then our students are coming in during lunch and saying, it's today my day to see my reading partner. It's today my day to come to Reading Partners and see my tutor. And then we tell the tutors, your student came and wanted to know, were they going to see you yesterday? And it wasn't their day, and they're excited to come, so that our tutors understand the investment they're making in their students, because we know why they're here. They want to have that impact, not only on literacy, but to hear that their students enjoy time with them. We also have social emotional learning lessons where our tutors and our students take a break, and we're going to talk about growth mindset. We're going to talk about our feelings and emotions. We're going to talk about mindfulness and empathy and all of these opportunities. And you know, you mentioned Uvalde, and Alan, I saw some comments coming in about Uvalde. We need our students to be able to talk about their emotions with their tutors, and their tutors to say, I'm scared too, and that's okay. We can be scared. And let's read a story about a student or a child and how they have those emotions. And so we want to make sure that our tutors are seeing our students as whole, and that we're not just so focused on literacy that they can't build these relationships. Because at the end of the year, the data proves that they also got all of the literacy growth. And that happened because an adult sat, invested with them for the year and read with them. And they, you know, I love what Paula said, they pick books that interest them. And I have sat there and read so many books about sharks in my career as a reading partners tutor as well, because kids love the books about sharks. And that's what gets them excited about reading. And that's what we want our tutors to know. We provide one-on-one coaching. We have multilingual learner training. We have student behavior management trainings. These are ongoing. So we have your orientation, and then we continue to provide those trainings throughout your entire process with reading partners, so that it's not welcome to reading partners, best of luck, but actually we did a training and we're going to keep supporting you. We're going to check in every day and make sure that you're getting what you need and help you think through, my student was shy, how do I get past that hurdle so that they're equally excited to come?
Great. Thanks so much. I want to come back to some of those issues, but before we do that, Diana, you're the one who hasn't spoken yet, so I'm going to call on you. And just quickly, how do you, in Story County, how do you prepare the people who you're deploying to work with students? How do you, I mean, really specifically, what do you do to prepare them for this relationship part of the work?
Well, we do an initial training, and then we do ongoing consulting with our tutors. We have site supervisors who are always available to help tutors during sessions, but then we do reflection, and we consult with the tutor to see what we might be able to do to personalize instruction for the student. So I have an example, because I know before we talked about examples are really good, but sometimes you have to cut through the layers of a resistance that a student has built over time, and you take a step backward to actually take a step forward and provide scaffolding. So we had a little first grader who had some developmental delays, and she didn't really want to read with her tutor. And so we talked to the parent to get some ideas about what the student liked. And we found out she really liked butterflies. So the tutor was reading books about butterflies. Then they would draw pictures of butterflies and write captions to go with those. They made origami butterflies where the student had to follow the specific directions online for how to fold and produce the butterfly. And then we use stuffed animals to keep the student's attention, practice word blending skills. And by the end of the session, the student was successfully reading level F biscuit books with the tutor with a huge smile on her face. So we try to see where the child is, what we can do to authentically come up with a plan. Another example is just using creativity. So maybe setting a theme. If you have a student that's struggling, but let's say they like to read Dog Man. So maybe you want to bring in a prop for Dog Man. You know, the child could wear Dog Man ears or something like that. So, or if they really like meteorology, they could write a letter to a local TV weather personality to get information. So it's, you know, trying to spark the curiosity, looking through the eyes of a child, listening attentively, building upon what the student says, establishing a supportive, caring tone, and conveying the love of reading. That's one thing we really want to do with kids, because we hear from the schools that students don't like to read. And we know that that isn't always the case. You can have a 3-year-old that sits on your lap and just doesn't want to quit reading. And then a high school student that maybe doesn't like reading. Well, what happens in between? We want to kind of change that and be role models to portray that love for reading.
It's great. Junlei, I want to bring you back into this conversation. I'm curious for your reactions to what you're hearing and what else you think we should be exploring right here.
Well, I was just so glad to hear about all of that intentional, careful preparation, orientation, and ongoing support for those who are reading with the young children. And I think any support we offer to the helpers ended up helping the children in that context. One of the questions actually I'm really interested to hear from our panelists is how do we kind of help our tutors define success? Not in long term, right? Because tutors' work is in the intimacy of the day-to-day sessions. But how do they kind of think about the progress they are making? Sometimes I think one of the challenges about being overly fixated on reading is we might narrowly define success in terms of the proficiency of a child, which comes slowly. But even in just the different stories, even in the story that Diane shared, you can see kind of there's all these other markers of relational success that happens long before, let's say a reading success becomes measurable.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Jen, I see you nodding your head. I'm curious for your reaction, because I know that you all are rigorous about what outcomes you're looking for and so forth. And Junlei is suggesting, like, there's some parts of this go slowly, and sometimes you have to go slow to go far. Tell us a little about how you do ongoing assessments and also correctives when things aren't going well. I'm going to come to others around that same set of questions.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge learning to read is hard and it's slow, and we're not going to see an immediate change. And we want to make sure our tutors know that. But there are small incremental pieces along the way, right? What is your student like when you pick them up from the reading center? And do you need to take a slower walk to the classroom, to the reading center? And this is why we ask questions of our tutors. How did it go today? And tell us. And sometimes they're going to tell us absolutely everything about the lesson and the skill that they were working on, and the student understands main idea and details really well. And sometimes they're going to say, my student seemed really tired today, or my student, do they have glasses? Do you know if they have glasses? Because it seems like they're having trouble reading. And we want to know those answers, because we can say things like, they might be shy, so why don't you take an extra lap around the hall before you bring them into the reading center, so that they're building that you two are talking to each other and there isn't that pressure to perform right away when they see you. We start to talk about those pieces. Every day at the end of our session, we ask what went well, what are the focuses for the next session, and how was your students' engagement today? And what could we do differently next time to make sure that they are engaged in this lesson? Because those are the small pieces, Shunli, as you mentioned, that we have to first get to those before we can get to the reading. Because if a student is not going to engage in conversation, if a student is going to sit with their head on the table, we aren't ever going to see them understand main idea and details. They have to trust their tutor. They have to be excited about coming there. I love the butterfly example, because that's how our students see their success, is us meeting them where they are, not asking them to come running to where we are. And I think that's really important, because we do an assessment at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. Everything in between is what we observe and what we talk about, and what we say at the end of the session, and how we prepare on those individualized plans for every single student.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Kara, how does Experience Corps now sort of track the progress that folks are making?
So we do a couple of things, because we are focused in making some progress with specific reading skills. We do track that. And actually I had pulled some data to share today. So last year we were able to serve 2,164 students and just shy of 70,000 tutoring hours overall. And our students grew academically in word accuracy from 40 to 55%, which is a great accomplishment. But I also wanted to highlight that we try to track behavior, change in behavior from the beginning of the year and the end of the year. So we ask tutors, we provide training on tutors on, in general, social emotional strategies and practices, but specifically targeting, we're looking at 5 important domains regarding social emotional learning, like self-management, self-efficacy, effort, emotion, and engagement. And we asked them to just simply observe where children are, where they're coming in, and then using the practices that they're provided during training and strategies. We do a lot of observations. We provide also our field staff observe tutors as well twice a year just to see how things are going. We're able to then ask the volunteers to come back at the end of the year and again measure to see if there's any change in behavior using a specific rubric. I'm excited to say that in all 5 domains, we were able to see growth over time. So that's really nice to see, is that change in behavior, which is ultimately what we want to see, right? Is that the change is long-term. And then asking the teachers if they're seeing that carry over into the classroom and understanding what the impact has been with this relationship between student and volunteer, sorry.
Anne, let me turn to you. I'm curious what you would say about this.
Sure. We like to train tutors with a metaphor about relationships, that relationships are the container in which all meaningful learning occurs. And if there are holes in their container, in the relationship, then no learning gets held. And so we do progress monitor on a regular basis those academic skills. And we know that if we don't see growth on a regular basis, that we should not only be addressing some of those components of dosage and fidelity to the actual model, but also to the components of the model related to relationship building. So those are the ways in which we look at it. And I'll add one tiny anecdote, and it is that during the pandemic, when a lot of learning was happening virtually and students were participating in large group synchronous classes online, we had several students that weren't attending their large group synchronous classes, but they were still attending their one-on-one or one-on-two tutoring session because of the relationship that they had built with that tutor. So not only do we have those progress monitoring data, but we also have those anecdotal stories of how that relationship impacts the time that we are able to spend with students tutoring.
Fantastic. Stick with us here for a second. And Junli, you and I talked about this question of sometimes this kind of tutoring happens in cross-cultural settings. And it can raise questions about equity and cultural competence. I'm curious how you think about that. And I know you and AMPAC have done a lot of thinking about the sort of the equity dimensions, if you will, of this and trying to get that right. So Junli, let me start with you, because I know you have some observations about this, and then come to Anne, and then I'm going to invite everybody else. And while these answers are going on, by the way, I just want to say to everybody, please put your questions in the question and answer box there. Full disclosure, I'm terrible at reading things while I'm doing one of these, but Emily is awesome at it. So Emily is going to pop back on and join us with some questions from our audience in just a moment. Junli, go ahead.
Sure, and I wanted to hear all of our panelists what they have to say. I think for our work, whether it is in reading or in any other context, we find that the relational practice is both a window in which we can see equity in equity, but it's also an opportunity, right, to promote equity. So in a window, in the sense that a lot of times our assumptions about children, about community, comes out in the way that we build relationship with them. And it's been, kind of been talked about in the mentoring literature for decades. That, for example, if someone comes in full of good intentions, but think of their role as here to save and change the child, or save the child from whatever environment they assume the child is from, that will come out in the interactions. And in mentoring research, we often find that shortens the length of that relationship and diminishes the quality of that relationship. But at the same time, you can imagine if a volunteer or tutor comes in And while they know that there's the reading goal and so on, but if they prioritize just getting to know the child or getting to know the child's family, right? Sometimes directly or indirectly through what the child's describing, that changes the relationship, at least how the relationship gets started. So in that way, those tiny little interactions, even in the very early days of meeting with the child, serves both as a window for the equity that we hold in our head, but at the same time have the opportunity to serve as an opportunity for equity, as an opportunity to build the kind of relationships that deeply respects the child as well as the child's families and child's communities.
Well, Anne, I know that AMPAC has done a lot of thinking about this, getting rid of the savior kind of thinking. I'm curious what you would say. And others, I hope you're thinking about this also, because this is super important. And I think we want to go around on this one. Go
Yeah, I
ahead,
was
Anne.
nodding along as you were talking, Jinli. We really think that equity is not just a set of beliefs about fairness, but it's a set of skills that we can practice about how we live out those values and beliefs. And so because of that, we train tutors with a pretty robust set of trainings around the value of equity skills and implicit bias. So we ask tutors to ask for the perspective of others in their work, especially the kids. We ask tutors to share power and offer choice. We ask tutors to assume the presence of strengths and assets in all kids and their families and caregivers. We also ask them to self-reflect, to evaluate the ways their own culture and perspectives might influence the way that they show up in tutoring sessions or with kids, and to affirm the value of every child. So we believe that training tutors to reflect on that practice in a regular way helps them to show up in a way that improves the quality of those tutoring sessions.
Wow, that was really powerful. It's true, you have thought about this a lot. Paula, I'm curious how you think about this as, you've got these young people who are full of good intentions, just what Junlei said, but probably have lots of blind spots also. So I'm curious, but as I said, full of good intentions. So how do you deal with that in preparing and supporting your tutors?
We usually ask them to act with a sense of maturity and make sure they believe they're doing the right thing. And we, as I mentioned, we do go in and check up on them. Since this program is, student run and not necessarily a professional organization,
Yep.
we haven't necessarily done as much in this field as we could have, since our focus is mostly on making sure this is an extracurricular style activity that can still help students learn.
Yep. Great. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in because there was a couple more questions for Paula. So if you want to just go ahead and give a quick little overview of how parents are involved, how you're supported by school staff in this work, because how it clarify how this really is a student-run program. Just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. We have one faculty sponsor from our school, and most of what she does is just sign community service forms for our tutors. So it really is just run by me and my peers. But what we do is we reach out to schools across the district and ask if they want to send it out to their students. And we've had other schools just recommend specific students to us. So parents sign up their students. And so most of our communication is through parents rather than schools, just because, it's their choice to have their child work with us and enroll with us. And also because of that, we don't have as much security screening. Also because most of our tutors are people that we know and people that go to our school or know mutual people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great. Great. Emily, another question? You want to
Yeah, I
draw a
thought-
question? Because I know there's some good questions now in the box, and keep them coming. We'll also post a survey in just a couple of moments. So I would we would very much appreciate if you would take a second to fill out the survey, which I'll post shortly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I love this question from Beth, and I think we've sort of discussed it, but it's so specific. So if there are 3 skills that are the foundation to building a trusting relationship, what are they, especially for struggling students? So I would just love to hear what everybody says about that. What are the top 3?
Jen, why don't you start?
We ask that our tutors respect the lived experiences of our students and what they're bringing into the tutoring session as a starting point. And it's something our AmeriCorps members and our program managers are actually actively watching for, those microaggressions and those assumptions and any white saviorism that might be coming in. That's the first place we started. You need to show up and respect your students and their experiences up until now. The next one is around talk time, that if an adult is talking at a student, our sessions are 45 minutes long. And if 25, 30 minutes of that time is the adult or tutor talking to a student, then the student doesn't have the opportunity to really engage either with literacy or with who they are as a person for their tutor. And so the talk time for building those relationships is really important. And the third one is around a match. And I saw another question around what's happening if it's not working. That's where our AmeriCorps members come in, and we have shifted tutors. We've had conversations around what's working, what's not working, and what does this student need. And it turns out this student, we've talked to their family, and we now know that a male role person for this student is actually very intimidating. And so we are going to change this up. And now we have a woman tutoring this student. All of those pieces also come into play is watching body language and watching how those students are engaging. Again, we see the literacy impact when a student is engaged in that lesson. So they need to trust the people who are there with them.
Diana, from your experience, you don't have to do all 3, but top 1 or 2 things that you think are foundational.
Well, I think collaboration is a must, because we have to look at this as a continuum, so that the tutors have a safety net, the students have a safety net, the site supervisors, whoever's in charge, it's just all part of a big collaboration between different sources to work together, and having strong communication skills. Communication is important because we do surveys with parents, tutors, and students to get their feedback. So we have had a little bit of a challenge. We always ask our tutors to do a reflection and give us feedback about sessions. And sometimes we don't always get the feedback from the tutors. So it's something that is really important for us to continue to use as a catalyst for the future, is getting the strong communication.
Great. Junlei, give us your expert view. 3 things that it could be 2 that are foundational for forging that relationship.
I don't want to duplicate anyone, so I'll just add one little thing, which is to help the child to see the connection between their effort and their progress, however small the effort is and however small that progress is. And I think struggling readers have the hardest time seeing that. And doing that isn't just about reading. It's about letting the child know that I really see that you're trying, and I see. So this isn't just a matter of praising. This is just to help the child make that connection. And in that process, I think the child trusts you because the child knows that you see that they're trying, which for a struggling reader, it's so hard for them to feel seen in that way.
Fantastic. Emily, do we have another question you want to post?
A specific question for you, Kara, from Jennifer. What were the 5 domains you used to track behavioral changes?
Yeah, so we also had done a research study with our external evaluators not too long ago, And I believe we also looked at the DESA and the DESA Mini to help guide it. But we look at self-management, self-efficacy, effort, emotional regulation, and then engagement. And then we have specific observable behavior based in a rubric on those 5 domains so that we can gauge to see if there has been behavior change based on all of the strategies that our tutors use throughout the year and working with them.
Fantastic. I want to make an observation here for a second. There's the poll. Please fill this out while you pretend to listen to what I'm saying. I think that we haven't talked about it, and I don't think we have time anymore to talk about it today, but I think that the level of attention to relationships that everybody's talking about here today changes the nature of the experience for the participant as well, not just for the child, and can make this a much less of a transaction and much more of a profound connection with a young person, which has qualities that can be scary, an emotional connection that can be unsettling, particularly when you're dealing with young people who are in difficult circumstances and who are struggling in school, but also can be so much more rewarding. Junlei, you talk about the helping the helpers so that the helpers can better help the kids. I just think that the quality of the experience, and I think the care that all of you have talked about in how you prepare people and how you support people is in what is really hard work. I mean, this is not easy. These are kids who are struggling, and they're struggling for a complicated set of reasons. So we're putting people in really important and difficult situations. But the kind of care, preparation, and then ongoing support, I also really want to +1 on all the comments about reflection and how important that is. Junlei, when we talked earlier, you talked about how important that is, and reflection on practice, and really trying to get better at this part, not a technical part, but this relationship part. Maybe make a quick comment on that, and then I think we'll close out quickly, unless Emily, you've got more questions that you want us to. But Junlei, talk about this sort of continuous improvement notion that we talked about earlier.
I think if we could just think about these as parallel processes, right? And so we can think about kind of do for the tutors what we imagine the best tutors do for children. The way they support them, the way they help them to see themselves in the act, right? So help the tutors see themselves in the tutoring act. And what you just described, John, is this idea of reciprocity, right? This is not just a transaction, but this is something that's reciprocal and mutual. And it's certainly that case between tutors and the children, but you can imagine that same reciprocal relationship exists maybe among the tutors or between the tutors and the organizations who are supporting them. So whatever kind of relational elements and threads that we're hoping to see between the tutor and children, we can kind of extend that line and imagine what does that look like for the adults, and what kind of supports we can put together. And if we continue to think and wonder that way, I think we can build stronger and stronger systems of tutors and teachers and volunteers.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our participants today. I have to just say, the big idea and then the commonality across all of the programs with different spiky parts for different programs, I just think is really, it makes me feel extremely optimistic about this work. I think there's so much to learn from this session. So I appreciate each and every one of you and all you brought to it today, and all that you bring to it in all of your work. I think in light of all that's happened over the past few days, it would be well to just close out this session with a couple of moments of silence to honor those in Uvalde and across the country who have felt so much pain recently. So why don't we stay together for a minute with some silence, and then just thank you all once again for joining today, both our panelists and all our guests. Thank you all very much, and we hope you will join us for future sessions. There they are on the screen. We look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. And again, thanks to our terrific panel today, and thanks to Hattie and to Sarah, and of course to Emily for helping put together this fantastic session.
Thanks, you,
and
John.
see you soon.
And thanks from me too. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hope to see you again.
Emily, were we supposed to stay on for a moment? I can't remember. Nope. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right, that was great. I mean, the presenters and everybody, it was a really great conversation.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.